I felt safe yet. And I think what I needed was to be held by my family, because that was the only thing that was going to make me understand that it was truly over.
Police officer was there. Within 5 minutes, we were out of the house down to FBI headquarters.
Houston, May 2001. 11-year-old Leah Henry vanished without a trace, just steps from her home after stepping off her school bus. A serial predator lurking in a white car lured her in with a polite question, plunging Leah into a violent, 3-day nightmare. He thought he had his prey secured, but Leah was no ordinary victim. Armed with a camera in her backpack and a secret notebook, she quietly plotted to expose the monster even while being held captive. A breathless chase between the FBI and a twisted predator began. What happened at that isolated cabin would ignite a fire of rage and end with an unbelievable shock. The 1st of May, 2001. The vibrant city of Houston, Texas, was bathed in the warm, fading light of a typical spring afternoon. For 11-year-old Leah Henry, it was supposed to be just another ordinary Tuesday. At exactly 3:30 p.m., the doors of her yellow school bus swung open, and she stepped out onto the familiar pavement of her neighborhood. Her house was only a short, seemingly safe block away. She slung her backpack over her shoulder, her mind likely filled with thoughts of the approaching end of the school year and the comforting routine of home. But this is where the story takes a dark turn. As Leah began her short walk down the sidewalk, a small, white 2-door hatchback slowly crept up alongside her on a quiet street. Behind the wheel sat Gary Dale Cox. To any passerby, he didn't look like a blood-chilling monster. Wearing ordinary clothes and a pair of glasses, he projected the disarming, harmless aura of a friendly neighborhood dad. It was a meticulously crafted disguise, a sinister mask hiding a sadistic serial predator on the hunt. Cox rolled down his passenger window, flashing a warm, deceptive smile. He looked at the innocent 5th grader and asked a simple, seemingly harmless question. Leah was a smart girl who had been taught well by her parents. She knew the golden rule about talking to strangers. Politely, she said no, and continued walking down the sidewalk, her eyes fixed on the safety of her house just a little further down the street, but the predator was relentless. He pressed the gas pedal, pulling the white car forward and aggressively angling it onto the sidewalk, physically blocking her from crossing to the other side. He leaned across the empty seat, his tone still unnervingly pleasant, and cast his final piece of bait. "Would you like to meet my children?" It was a devastating psychological trap. He preyed on her innocence, entirely exploiting the inherent trust a young child places in adults who look and act like normal parents. After a brief conversation, her defenses wavered. Believing she was merely talking to a friendly father, Leah made the fateful decision to open the door and step into the car. The second the door clicked shut, the terrifying reality of the situation revealed itself. The polite, smiling dad vanished instantly. In a sudden, violent movement, Cox lunged across her small body. Before Leah could even process what was happening or attempt to reach for the door, he grabbed the interior passenger handle and snapped it completely off. She was trapped. The blood-chilling sound of that breaking plastic echoed the brutal shattering of her childhood innocence. A frigid wave of pure terror washed over the 11-year-old as the devastating realization set in. She had been lured into a cage. The car sped away from the safety of her neighborhood, carrying her into a twisted, unimaginable nightmare. What strikes me the most about this moment is how easily true evil can hide in plain sight. I couldn't stop thinking about the absolute, paralyzing fear that must have gripped that little girl when she realized there was no way out. Almost 2 hours had passed since the school bus dropped Leah off. The late afternoon sun began to cast long, eerie shadows across the Houston neighborhood. Inside her home, Leah Henry paced the floor, a sickening knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Leah was a highly responsible 5th grader. She never deviated from her routine. Desperate for an explanation, Linda grabbed the phone and dialed her ex-husband, Tim. Her voice trembled with rising panic as she asked the question that would shatter their world. "Hello, did you pick up Leah?" On the other end of the line, Tim felt a sudden, icy chill run down his spine. "No, she's not here with me," he replied, his heart dropping into his stomach. They both knew instantly that something was terribly wrong. Leah just didn't do this. Chaos ensued. Tim immediately jumped into his car, his mind racing with terrifying possibilities. He sped the 6 miles to the campus where Leah attended classes for accelerated students, frantically scanning the streets and sidewalks along the way. He retraced her entire route, checking the neighborhood, looking for any sign of her backpack or her face. But the streets were empty. There was simply no explanation for her disappearance. The Houston Police Department was called in, and the response was swift. Realizing the gravity of a missing child report, the case was immediately turned over to the most experienced detectives in the homicide division. But the nightmare was only just beginning. Fearing that Leah had been snatched by a dangerous, highly mobile predator, the FBI stepped in just before midnight. Special agents Mark Young and David Rash arrived at the Henry home, knowing all too well that in child abduction cases, the first 24 hours, the golden hours, are the critical window between life and death.
Where are you going now, Tim? Are you driving up there?
While law enforcement set up a massive command post, Tim Henry refused to just sit and wait. The thought of his little girl in the hands of a monster was tearing him apart. When a tip came in, claiming a young girl matching Leah's description had been spotted with adults at a nearby gas station, Tim rushed into the frigid night to investigate it himself. The scene was heartbreaking. Tim stood in the dimly lit back room of that gas station, his eyes glued to a security monitor. He watched the grainy, obscured CCTV footage loop over and over, his heart pounding against his ribs, desperately hoping to recognize his daughter's face. But as the fuzzy images played out, the devastating truth set in. It wasn't Leah. The lead was a dead end, leaving him drowning in a paralyzing sea of helplessness. I gotta be honest with you. I cannot even fathom the sheer, suffocating terror of staring at that screen, praying to see your child, only to be met with another dead end. What do you guys make of the father's frantic reaction in this desperate moment? Drop your take in the comments. How would you feel if you were in his shoes? As the desperate search for 11-year-old Leah entered its second day, investigators were about to uncover a chilling pattern. But what no one knew was that Leah was not the first. As FBI agents and local detectives scoured police databases for any sign of the white hatchback, they discovered 2 very recent, horrifyingly similar abductions that had occurred just months apart. The horrifying truth is, a highly mobile serial predator was actively hunting innocent children along the Interstate 10 corridor. The media had already dubbed him the I-10 Predator, a moniker that sent shivers down the spines of parents across Texas and Louisiana. Investigators realized they were dealing with a calculated, sadistic monster. In March of 2001, a 9-year-old girl named Nikki was snatched in broad daylight near her home in San Antonio. Just a month later, in April, an 11-year-old named Lisa was abducted at gunpoint from her apartment complex in Louisiana. The suspect's modus operandi was identical in every blood-chilling detail. He exclusively targeted young girls between the ages of 9 and 11. He drove a small, white, 2-door hatchback. But what made him truly terrifying was his deceptive nature. This twisted predator was a master of manipulation. In Lisa's case, he actually approached her wearing a fake police badge, identifying himself as an officer on official business to lure her into his vehicle before pulling out a gun and binding her wrists and ankles with duct tape. Archival news footage from 2001 paints a devastating picture of the panic gripping the South. Frantic Amber Alerts flashed across television screens, interrupting scheduled programming with the desperate plea for a white hatchback. In Houston, the community rallied around Tim and Linda Henry. Gay Smither, a mother who knew the unimaginable pain of losing a child, immediately mobilized the Laura Recovery Center to aid in the massive ground search for Leah. The footage of volunteers handing out flyers, searching every alley and wooded area, is both inspiring and deeply tragic. This part really makes my blood boil when you realize just how methodical and ruthless this man was. This wasn't a random crime of opportunity, it was a carefully orchestrated nightmare. He was an experienced, depraved sadist who hunted children where they lived and played, holding them captive in boarded-up hunting cabins for days, subjecting them to brutal, unimaginable torment before finally releasing them back onto the streets. And with every abduction, the FBI noted that his level of violence was escalating and he was holding his victims for longer periods. The realization hit the command post like a ton of bricks. Leah Henry was now in the clutches of an experienced serial kidnapper, a predator who had successfully evaded law enforcement for months. The nightmare was only just beginning. Late into the night, the white hatchback finally came to a halt in the heart of the Texas Hill Country, in a small town called Kerrville. Leah was nearly 300 miles away from her family, standing in front of a dilapidated, isolated hunting cabin swallowed by the dense woods. This was Gary Dale Cox's lair, a place where no one could hear her screams, and where he intended to keep her as his wife in a twisted, demented reality. He led her inside at gunpoint and immediately began securing her like a prisoner of war. He didn't just lock the door, he deadbolted her into a nightmare. Using a combination of rope and industrial zip ties, Cox bound Leah's hands and ankles, often tying her to a table or even suspending her hands above her head. The physical pain was unfathomable as the plastic ties bit into her young skin, but the psychological terror was even worse. He taunted her with newspaper clippings of her own disappearance, telling her that her parents would eventually give up and forget her. At that moment, most 11-year-olds would have shut down completely. But Leah Henry was different. This is where the story takes a turn that still gives me chills. Instead of letting despair consume her, Leah made a silent, warrior-like vow. She was going to get home, and she was going to make sure this man never hurt another girl again. Every time Cox left the cabin to run errands or scout the area, Leah didn't just sit in the dark and cry, she fought. With agonizing patience, she figured out how to wiggle her small hands and ankles out of the zip ties, secretly loosening the binds just enough to escape them when he was gone, but slipping back into them perfectly before he returned. But escaping the restraints wasn't enough for Leah. She wanted justice. Deep inside her school backpack, which Cox had carelessly thrown into a corner, sat a small camera. In a move of staggering intelligence, Leah retrieved that camera. With trembling hands, she began documenting the horror. She took photos of the interior of the cabin, the surroundings outside the window, and most devastatingly, the bruises and marks covering her own body. She then took out her school agenda and began writing detailed, dated entries of everything Cox did to her, every word he said, and every detail about the cabin. She was building a case against her own captor while still in his clutches. She knew that if she died, this notebook and camera would be her voice from the grave. If she lived, they would be the nails in his coffin. I gotta be honest with you, the sheer mental fortitude it takes for a child to think about evidence while enduring such a horrific ordeal is something I can barely wrap my head around. It's a testament to the incredible strength of the human spirit. Su tongming va barnling korkobe 11 tornai ka hirn ban nerfokong, tut kongter tin nor. Let me know what you think is Leah the most resilient victim we've ever covered. Drop your thoughts in the comments. No one could have predicted what happened next, but the entire trajectory of the massive investigation shifted thanks to the sheer bravery of another little girl. The FBI, working around the clock and desperate for any viable lead, decided to re-interview the previous victims of the I-10 predator. During one of these heartbreaking sessions, a crucial, fragmented memory finally surfaced. One of the young survivors recalled that while her captor had a cover over her head in the car, she had managed to catch a fleeting glimpse of a green road sign. It read a single word: Shiner. That word was the massive breakthrough the FBI desperately needed. Shiner, Texas, sits right off the I-10 corridor, pointing law enforcement directly toward the rugged, isolated terrain of the Texas Hill Country, specifically near Seguin and Kerrville. The massive search grid immediately shifted out of the Houston area. With a specific rural region in mind, Texas investigators scoured mountains of local police records, hunting for any white hatchbacks stopped in that area over the past few months. Against all odds, they found a needle in the haystack. A traffic officer near San Antonio had previously issued a warning ticket to a suspicious white hatchback. On the ticket, the driver had identified himself as Gregory Cox. Agents raced to track him down, only to hit what felt like a devastating brick wall. Gregory Cox was deceased, but the terrifying truth was hiding just beneath the surface. Investigators quickly discovered that Gregory had an older brother, a man who perfectly matched the chilling physical description of the heavy-set, middle-aged predator, Gary Dale Cox. He was a high-risk, violent, predatory offender with an extensive, horrifying criminal history. They finally had a name. They knew exactly who the monster was, but the blood-chilling reality remained. They still didn't know exactly where he was, and Leah's time was rapidly running out. Meanwhile, nearly 300 miles away in that suffocating, isolated hunting cabin, the pressure was boiling over. Cox was actively monitoring the news. He saw the intense media coverage, the frantic Amber Alerts, and the specific descriptions of his white hatchback being broadcast across the entire state. The walls were closing in, and the predator was spooked. In a frantic, desperate attempt to evade the massive manhunt, he grabbed Leah, forced her outside, and hastily began spray painting his infamous white car a stark, deceptive red right there on the gravel driveway. He was preparing to flee, and he was taking Leah with him. Quick pause here. If you are as invested in Leah's incredible survival story as I am, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It really helps the channel grow, so I can keep bringing these powerful, shocking true crime stories to light. Now, let's get back to the intense chase. He threw Leah into the back of the newly painted red vehicle and tightly covered her head with a pillowcase. She was completely blind, helpless, and terrified that this might be her final ride. The nightmare was reaching its absolute boiling point. It was the morning of May 4th, and the tension was suffocating. Following a tip from a vigilant citizen about a suspicious vehicle, Kerr County Sheriff's Deputy David Billiter was dispatched to a sparsely populated, heavily wooded area known for its isolated hunting cabins. Billiter cautiously drove his cruiser down a rugged, secluded dirt road. At the end of the driveway, he spotted a car. However, it wasn't the white hatchback everyone was desperately searching for. It was a red car with the wrong license plates. Assuming it was a dead end, he pulled his cruiser up to block the driveway, intending to briefly explain his presence to whoever was on the property. Little did they know, they were standing ground zero with pure evil. Billiter had no idea that just minutes earlier, Gary Dale Cox had frantically spray-painted the car red. Suddenly, the driver's side door swung open, and Cox stepped out. In a split second, Billiter's trained eyes locked onto a lethal threat. The man was holding a gun. The deputy immediately unholstered his own weapon and screamed a deafening command. "Drop your weapon now!" Instead of surrendering, the twisted predator darted around to the passenger side of the vehicle, his gun still drawn. A heart-stopping standoff ensued in the middle of nowhere. Billiter stood his ground, his gun trained on the suspect, repeatedly shouting, "Put your gun down! Drop your weapon right now!" The air was thick with the imminent threat of a deadly shootout. Inside the freshly painted red car, 11-year-old Leah Henry was crouching low, out of sight. She heard the chaotic screaming and instantly recognized the authoritative voice of a police officer. But she was absolutely terrified. If bullets started flying, she would be caught right in the crossfire. And no one could have predicted what happened next. In a display of unimaginable bravery, Leah made a split-second decision that would save her own life. Clutching her school backpack, the very backpack that contained her hidden camera and the agonizing diary of her captivity, the little girl burst out of the car. Her heart pounding at 90 miles per hour, she ran blindly toward the police cruiser, directly through the line of fire. Billiter was stunned to see a young child suddenly sprinting toward him amidst an armed standoff. He quickly ordered her into the back of his cruiser, yelling at her to get down on the floorboard to shield her from the danger. The moment she was secure, Billiter threw his vehicle into reverse and aggressively sped backward down the long dirt driveway. As they tore away from the cabin, a single, sharp gunshot echoed through the trees. Billiter grabbed his radio and broadcasted the words that would bring a nation to its knees. "I've got the girl, and I'm leaving." When heavily armed backup units finally swarmed the isolated cabin, they prepared for a violent siege, but the monster was already gone. Realizing he was entirely cornered and his reign of terror was over, Gary Dale Cox had taken the coward's way out. He lay dead beside his vehicle, having ended his own life with a single gunshot to the head. What struck me the most was the sheer, raw courage of an 11-year-old girl making that terrifying sprint for her life while an armed madman stood just feet away. I'm curious, how would you react if you were in Leah's shoes in that exact terrifying moment? Could you find the courage to run? Let me know your feelings down in the comments. What do you think of this section? We just have the final part left to wrap up this incredible story of survival and catharsis. 300 miles away in Houston, the suffocating, agonizing wait finally shattered with a single, miraculous phone call from the FBI. "We found her," the voice on the line said. "She's alive." Tim Henry literally dropped the phone. The sheer, overwhelming ecstasy that washed over him and Linda in that split second is almost impossible to put into words. Within minutes, they were rushed to an airstrip and flown directly to Kerrville by a volunteer pilot. Inside the walls of the Kerr County Sheriff's Department, a deeply emotional, tear-stained reunion took place. When 11-year-old Leah finally collapsed into the tight embrace of her mother, father, and big sister, the nightmare truly ended. Tim gave his daughter the longest hug of his life. In their arms, Leah finally felt the immense weight of terror lift off her small shoulders. She was safe. Back at the isolated cabin, investigators processed the gruesome scene. Alongside the chilling tools of captivity, the duct tape, the thick ropes, and the plastic zip ties, they found something entirely unexpected. They found Leah's school backpack. Inside were the photographs she had bravely taken and the meticulous, heartbreaking diary she had kept, documenting every single horrific detail of her captivity. She had essentially built an airtight, irrefutable case against Gary Dale Cox while she was being held captive. I gotta be honest with you, when I look at the entirety of this case, my mind is completely blown by the sheer fortitude of this little girl. Leah's bravery was the absolute key to bringing down a sadistic monster who had spread terror and devastation across multiple states. She didn't just survive, she actively outsmarted a seasoned serial predator. Her undeniable will to live not only saved her own life, but undoubtedly saved the lives of countless other innocent girls who would have eventually crossed his deadly path. But the most beautiful and inspiring part of this story isn't just the miraculous rescue, it's the incredible woman Leah Henry grew up to be. She absolutely refused to let those 3 days of profound darkness dictate the rest of her life. Overcoming unimaginable trauma, Leah pursued her lifelong dreams with a fierce, unyielding determination. Today, decades after that horrific ordeal, she is a successful marine biologist. She continues to share her harrowing story with the world, standing not as a broken victim, but as a triumphant survivor. She uses her voice to inspire others, proving that even in the face of pure, unadulterated evil, the human spirit can remain entirely unbreakable. Finally, after hours of paralyzing terror and years of enduring pain, justice was served, and the Henry family could truly begin the long, peaceful process to heal. The I-10 predator's reign of terror was permanently extinguished, and Leah took her life back. What do you guys think? Does this incredibly powerful ending bring you any sense of relief and closure? Drop your thoughts down below. I'll keep digging if there's more to uncover. Thank you for watching, and please share if this story touched your heart. Thanks for all the comments, you guys make this worth it.